Now, the concept of multiverses represents a captivating idea that transcends the traditional notions of the universe. Rooted in theoretical physics and cosmology, the idea posits the existence of an ever-expanding array of parallel universes, each with its own unique set of possibilities. The idea particularly comes from the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, but to understand that, you'd have to go to the very beginning, December 14, 1900, the birth of quantum mechanics. Just kidding, of course. We actually need to go back to 1801. Thomas Young in 1801 came up with something known as the double slit experiment, which involves shooting many particles like photons or electrons through two slits and onto a screen. Now, you'd expect the particles to elegantly and exclusively go through only one of the two slits at a time, forming a discrete light pattern of like two blobs on the screen over time. But what would actually happen is that the particles would go through the slits, forming a wave interference pattern on the screen, lending credence to the idea that each individual particle would go through both slits at once. Visualizing this in practice, we treat those particles as waves, with the interference of the waves producing the effect that we see on the screen ahead. Now, this in and of itself isn't all that intriguing, but when you set up a detector near the slits that would conclusively tell you which slit each particle goes through, needless to say, shit gets crazy. Like, the particles suddenly decide, nah, fuck being waves for real, and instead of seeing the wave interference pattern on the screen, you'd see a discrete light pattern of two blobs as initially expected, as if the wave suddenly collapsed into particles after you messed with them. This, in essence, can serve as an analogy for the wave function, a mathematical expression that defines the distribution of all the possible outcomes or positions a specific particle or quantum system can be found in if you were to try to measure it. Measuring a quantum system would in turn collapse its wave function, giving you a single outcome, as shown by what happens if you set up a detector in the double slit experiment. Wave functions don't just collapse, but they also continue evolving afterward over time, as per the Schrödinger equation, and there's an implication of that I'll later bring up. The wave function is essentially a quantum description that accounts for the uncertainty inherent in a particle's position, momentum, and other properties. The uncertainty is due to the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which dictates how you cannot know both a particle's position and speed at the same time. My favorite analogy to encapsulate this idea is by imagining yourself as a blind person who has a ball in front of you that may or may not be moving. You'd like to know how far away the ball is from you, so you decide to throw another ball at it. If the ball bounces back to you in a relatively short amount of time, you'd know that the ball is close by. The only problem is, by throwing your ball at the ball in front of you, you moved the ball in front of you, and its position is no longer what it was initially. By just trying to measure a property of a quantum particle, like trying to measure the position of the ball as a blind man, you change the very properties of said particle. This, in effect, is what observing a particle means. You're not just seeing it with your eyes or consciousness, but you're interacting with it. The detector in the double slit experiment would have to shoot something at the electrons or photons to detect them, thereby observing them, making them blush and go all shy and shit before collapsing into particles immediately. A stark contrast to just leaving them be so that they can just collapse on the screen, whereupon which we can see the interference pattern. The only thing you can do in such a scenario is come up with a mathematical expression called a wave function that can represent all the different possible states the ball can be found in, but by interacting with or observing the ball, you collapse the entire wave function into a specific representation of its position at a specific point in time. Given how observing a particle, say in the double slit experiment, would in turn collapse the greater wave function representing its many possible configurations into one specific outcome, illustrated by the wave interference pattern changing into a discrete pattern associated with classical particles, physicists Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg posited that observation by an observer is the one crucial factor in the collapse of a wave function, and that reality itself, with every single thing in it, big or small, is contingent upon measurement, where the act of observation or interaction brings forth a definitive outcome from a realm of quantum possibilities. That idea, if you think about it, has very bizarre implications. Would a tree that falls in a forest make a sound if nobody is around to hear it? Is reality really just like a video game where shit you don't look at is just simply not rendered? This, of course, led Bohr to have many an argument with Einstein himself, with Einstein reportedly asking Bohr, and I quote, "Motherfucker, do you really think that the moon disappears after you stop looking at it?" To which Bohr replied, Bro, with the way these edibles ain't right now, However, one man and his cat changed everything. And no, I don't mean H.P. Lovecraft, he'll come up soon in another topic. Erwin Schrödinger entertained the ideas posited by Bohr and Heisenberg, dubbed the Copenhagen interpretation, and set up the infamous cat experiment meant to highlight the bizarre, paradoxical nature of reality given the idea's validity. The experiment revolves around a sealed box with A radioactive atom that has a random chance of decaying in a given amount of time, B, a Geiger counter that would detect the radioactive decay and would release a hammer that would break a vial of toxic poison, and C, a cat. Now, the gist of the experiment is to convey that until you actually lift the lid of the box and make that scientific observation of either the cats being alive or dead, the wave function representing everything in the box would not be collapsed. Thus, in a sense, the cat would be both alive and dead at the same time, simply because an observation hasn't narrowed down a specific outcome yet. In other words, the cat's fate would be in quantum superposition, both alive and dead at the same time. Now, the analogy he came up with was, needless to say, kind of stupid, but he was trying to make it sound stupid because of how bizarre the Copenhagen interpretation was to him. The idea was not to literally say that a cat who's both alive and dead is something realistically practical, but rather to play at one question. When exactly does a system stop existing in superposition and instead in a specific state? Because you have to realize that superposition is never really even seen in our macroscopic world, so who's to say it's even real or the full picture? Entertaining superposition, you have to wonder when exactly a quantum system with many indeterminate possibilities turns classical with determinate outcomes, such as what we are used to in our macroscopic world. Besides that, you have to ask, who exactly counts as the observer in this scenario? Can the cat not observe everything by itself, therefore barring any possibility of a superposition from the get-go? Is the Geiger counter not an observer? What about the radioactive atom itself? Wait, what about the particles of air and shit inside the box? Now, before the attempt to answer those questions came, there was one crackhead who might have also been on copious amounts of crystal methamphetamine, and he changed everything. And no, I'm not referring to myself. Hugh Everett III, this goddamn intellectual mastermind, at one point in time was like, yo, what if when you lift the lid of this box right here, reality itself branches out into two separate versions, ladies and gentlemen. One where the cat is dead and one where it isn't. Now, it's at this point many of you are probably asking, wait, hold on. Whoever said anything about parallel universes? Well, the idea essentially ties into a concept called quantum decoherence, or specifically environmental decoherence, and a concept called quantum entanglement. Now, entanglement is kind of simple. It essentially has to do with multiple wave functions joining each other and becoming one, with a lot of the information of the original individual wave functions lost or muddied. In the context of the Schrödinger's cat experiment, the radioactive atom would have its own wave function, right? It's either decayed or not decayed, but until you measure it, you don't know. So technically, it's in a superposition of both, but since the Geiger counter can detect the atom's decay, the Geiger counter's own wave function, which could give you a superposition of detected and not detected, joins in or entangles with that of the atom. Because if you know the Geiger counter went off, you know the radioactive atom decayed, and vice versa. The wave function of the cat's fate, which could give you a superposition of both dead and alive, also entangles with the wave functions of the others combined. Because if you know that the cat's dead, then you know both that the counter went off and that the atom decayed, with the opposite being true if you find that it's alive. And finally, since you yourself are also fundamentally composed of quantum particles and electrons, the wave function of you, which could give you a superposition of a you that sees the cat alive and a you that sees the cat dead, would be entangled with the wave function for everything in the box. The implications of which being that there is no collapse of the wave function when you open the box, because you yourself are entangled in its possibilities. The you that would see the cat dead would be different from the you who wouldn't. If you yourself are a part of a set of possibilities, then you would basically find your own being in a superposition, the implications of which are unknown. That's where Hugh Everett steps in and says, hey, instead of something like a wave function collapse, because the definition of the observer is so vague, maybe both realities happen simultaneously, and when you open the box, you'd see the cat both alive and dead at the same time. But of course, since no one in our world has ever found themselves in such a situation, that's where he reasons that the alternate possibility takes place in another branch of reality altogether, created at that very point in lieu of the wave function collapse. You can kind of figure out immediately how instead of solving the problem for the mechanism behind the wave function collapse, he instead just shifted the problem around by introducing a branching of reality in its stead. Instead of the question being, what is the mechanism behind the collapse? Now you can ask, what is the mechanism behind the branching of reality? At what point would reality branch, and what ties you to one branch in particular? And more importantly, why would reality branch? Literally, who the fuck said anything about parallel worlds? Well, the answer to that last question has to do with quantum decoherence, or specifically environmental decoherence. You see, since there are particles of air inside the box with their own wave functions, these particles themselves would be entangled with everything else, because the state of the air particles in the box would be different if the cat were dead than if it were alive. And technically, you could glean the cat's fate from these air particles and their composition. But if you're going to add in air particles, you have to realize that there's not really any practical limit to entanglement and that everything is entangled with each other. The air particles outside the box are entangled with the box and everything in it, and that goes all the way out, including everything in the entire universe. In other words, the wave function for the entire universe would have many different possible states regarding the cat's fate and whether or not you see it. But instead of a traditional wave function collapse, Everett posits that every possibility would occur simultaneously in separate branches of the universe. Because the fact of the matter remains, something would have to collapse the wave function of the entire universe whenever a quantum measurement happens anywhere in the world, which happens all the time. And even hypothesizing the existence of a third-party omniscient being would not necessarily solve anything, given how that being's own wave function would also just entangle with everything else. Therefore, maybe a collapse doesn't even happen, and rather, reality simply branches out whenever there's a measurement, with all the possibilities happening simultaneously. After branching, the wave function continues to evolve, before branching out again in practically no time, therefore obeying the Schrödinger equation and determining our very reality in real time. When you really consider that anything as basic as you're deciding to use your phone for 5 minutes after you wake up could be as a result of quantum fluctuations in your brain and body, which themselves would be influenced by everything around you and beyond, there would not only be a branch in reality corresponding to there being a universe where you didn't use your phone at all, but one where you used it for more than 5 minutes. It's also important to note that this does not mean that there's a world out there where an electron turned into a proton, because a wave function would show many possibilities, but it would not show impossibilities like that. Though there could be a world where, for example, my random quantum ass upload schedule is actually normal. Like, now that shit needs a wave function, bro, for real. But at the end of the day, since you can't actually scientifically prove that any of this is false, it technically could be true, but still doesn't necessarily mean that it is. It's kind of like trying to prove the existence of a god or multiple gods. Like, you cannot scientifically and empirically prove such a thing. That's why religion is called faith. It's all up in the air, basically. For a long time, physicists actually didn't give a shit about which interpretation is correct, and a lot of the extra stuff was just treated as philosophy. And bear in mind, these two interpretations only scratched the surface. They didn't care about the why, because at the end of the day, the math behind the calculations actually remained the same. So you could literally take the Copenhagen interpretation as the truth and it would not make a practical difference. However, as time went on and experiments became more and more sophisticated, it actually did become clear that the interpretation does in fact matter. If you were to believe in Einstein's interpretation that he came up with along with two other scientists, well then you'd literally be wrong, because he predicted some sort of hidden variable accounting for entanglement. You see, he believed that if two particles were, say, a light year apart and they were both entangled, and that if you were to measure something about the first particle, you would in turn affect the properties for that second particle. The problem arising from the fact that you wouldn't affect the other particle after a year, but instead instantly, implying that there's an exchange of information happening faster than the speed of light, which he proved was impossible. Therefore, he argued that our understanding of quantum mechanics is incomplete, which he wasn't wrong about, but also that there was basically some sort of hidden variable ingrained in those particles from the very beginning that would somehow avoid the exchange of information later on. It later turned out that his hidden variable theory applied mathematically provided obvious flaws. A physicist named Bell came up with an inequality that entertained the hidden variable idea, and I'm not going to get into what his inequality test was because it's quite a bit more complex complex than it initially lets on, but the end result basically set an upper bound on something if Einstein was right. But real-life experiments with the variable in mind broke that upper bound, with there being some dumb shit like an inequality saying 5 is less than 2, implying that in real life there is no hidden variable, and in turn proving that Einstein was wrong. Like, for all the hype he gets, like, I don't even know why they call him Einstein, bro. Clearly he's not even that smart. Like, if I were him, right, I'd simply never get it wrong in the first place, honestly. Like, at the end of the day, like, in many ways, right, I'm actually superior to all of these scientists because try as they might to model the universe and everything in it, I stand here not giving up or being wrong after trying, but simply not even trying to begin with. It's like trying to count infinity or figuring out what happened before the Big Bang. Like, even if I get close, I'll never reach the end goal, right? Like, it's all relative in the end. Oh, see, like, it's not even that hard. Like, everyone makes a big deal of Einstein's relativity and how he came up with 2 of the motherfuckers, but I just give you a third one, bro, for we call that shit blue donkey relativity. Now, so if the interaction of an entangled particle can affect another particle arbitrarily far away instantly, does that mean that you can violate Einstein's special relativity like you might in Elf Twink? What if I have a quantum system in Asia influencing a quantum system in North America, and I somehow exploit its influence on the other system and use it for communication, let's say? Would I then achieve faster than light communication? Not really, because the influence is completely random and simply can't be exploited for communication as a result of its randomness. But a lot about its mechanisms remain vague, and suffice to say we're not even close to understanding or having the full picture here. Many questions still remain, some of which revolve around why there even is a superposition and how the wave collapse, if there even is one, happens. Now at this point you might be thinking, hey, is there a limit on the size of objects regarding the effects of quantum mechanics? In other words, was the cat really both dead and alive simultaneously? Short answer, no. Long answer, while there's technically no limit on the object's size, if the wavelength of the object, which every object has, is too short in, say, the double slit experiment for one, then any interference would be negligible, and the greater the object's interaction with the environment, the less distinct its interference. With particles like electrons or photons in that experiment, there is technically decoherence as a result of the environment, and therefore the interference pattern does get affected, just not enough to tangibly appear as a total wave function collapse. With macroscopic objects, though, you have both an extremely tiny wavelength and an insane amount of interaction with the environment, just because of how many particles the average object is made out of, which can be in the octillions and beyond. As a result, we only ever observe classical behavior in our daily lives, as if the wave function for everything is perpetually collapsed. And so, even if you were Schrodinger's cat yourself, you would not experience a superposition of fates, especially considering how decoherent the different possibilities would be, akin to a total apparent wave function collapse. And again, the question for the mechanism behind the actual or apparent wave function collapse and what happens afterward is still completely up in the air, and a lot is still not understood. But at this point, you might also be thinking, Rick, you motherfucker, I didn't even realize. I remember this being a Zombies video. You got me again with the quantum mechanics bullshit. Now, quit busting my balls, you dirty impala, and tell me how this relates to zombies. Well, it doesn't actually. I just wanted to talk about something else for a minute and shit on smart people, of course, but actually it might just be related. Let me show you how. Now what I have here is a Mandelbrot set, an equation that, when visualized, shows infinitely many branching fractals. And the only reason I'm bringing this shit up is because I want to be quirky and not just use some dumbass JPEG of like a bunch of bubbles that would pop up if you googled multiverse. Now, if you were to posit that the many worlds interpretation actually holds true in the world of COD Zombies, then technically, if each of these branches correspond to a unique branch of the multiverse, then maybe in one of these branches somewhere, Group 935 would discover element 115 not in World War II, but rather World War I. Maybe, in some alternate reality, Group 935 under the German Empire in World War I began work on a dig site in northern France and discovered ancient crypts, and in these crypts, they unearthed forbidden power. Wait a minute. Hidetaka Miyazaki, I told you to stay in my fucking video games. Damn, now we must suffer, for we have unearthed the forbidden blood of the Great Ones. The map to end Black Ops 2 Zombies Origins begins with one and only Samantha Maxis narrating how it all began, with many of the same story beats of Group 935 and Element 115 glossed over. Even the original Shinonuma meteorite gets shown, colored blue instead of the original red, all of it discovered and exploited by the German Empire to help the Central Powers win the Great War. It definitely lends credence to the idea that this is an entirely separate reboot or spin-off of Zombies, but you and I both know I wouldn't have given a 20-minute crash course on some of the basics of quantum mechanics if that were true. Honestly, I would have, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of the Zombies hitherto has been supported by real-life science and mythology. Everything pertaining to Element 115, the Wonder Weapons, the teleportation, the quantum shit in Richtofan's grand scheme, the Vril, it's all based on real-life shit, which makes the overarching story much stronger simply because it has a real-life basis. To have your story grounded in reality, no matter how zany it gets, is a very powerful position to be in. In the context of horror and immersion, one can have their experience of zombies greatly enhanced simply due to the idea that a lot of the story beats and ideas are tethered to real life, mythology or otherwise. Even in the context of mythology, there's a subtle difference between something entirely and contemporarily fictional and something that is also fictional but part of current or past real-life culture and history. The era of zombies hitherto is often attributed to one Jimmy Zielinski, who directed most of the maps. However, as I hinted before, the era of zombies henceforth is attributed to one Jason Blundell, who directed Mob the Dead and many of the later maps. This era comes with a rather disorienting stylistic shift, with many complex story beats often multi-layered, with their complexity even influencing the actual gameplay loops of the maps. It's worth noting that while Zielinski and Blundell are often regarded as the auteurs behind their respective eras, there are many more people working behind the scenes with an arguably larger influence, many of whom did not change all that much going from one era to the next. And the only reason I bring that up is because people fucking attribute everything about zombies that is good to like Jason Blundell. Like, you'd play Zetsubo Nishima and they'd be like, oh yeah, no, Jason Blundell was so fucking crazy for coming up with the fucking plant mechanics. Like, dude, he is the creative director, okay? Like, he did not fucking come up with like the scripts for the fucking plants. Shut the fuck up, bro. Still, for simplicity's sake, I will refer to the two eras by just attributing them to the directors. Now, I could have chosen to dive headfirst into Blundell zombies without giving it any basis to stand on, but I chose not to. One thing I realized while researching the lore of Blundell zombies is how much more zany and unrealistic it can get compared to Zielinski's zombies. When the entire foundation of the new story rests upon a multiverse, like, it really does seem contrived, as if the executives higher up the food chain wanted zombies to continue even though the main story had already ended, and so they just decided to say, oh, alternate timeline, and in reality that probably is true. The truth is, the philosophical ideas behind quantum mechanics did more for screenwriters than any physicist out there, bro, for real. You see the shit they do in Marvel, like, goddamn, like, I could have just went with it, accepting the reality that maybe this is contrived. However, I chose to cope, okay? When a lot of Zielinski's zombies was based on both real-life science and pseudoscience, only resulting in its enhancement, it's unfair not to give the same treatment to Blundell's zombies. The concept of a multiverse, whether or not it's true, is still technically based in real life. Just because it's an overused trope in media does not mean that it's anything new to zombies. Like, zombies has always been doing this type of shit forever, so like, in the context of zombies, Blundell's new multiverse magic trick that he pulled out of his ass wasn't necessarily contrived, but rather part of a natural evolution of ideas and story beats. That is what you call the biggest cope of all time, but I really do believe that Blundell's zombies is greatly enhanced, knowing that at the very least, the foundation the story rests upon is in a way realistic. I will break continuity here and say that the story gets unbearably more complex later on, so establishing groundedness this early on would only help one's stomach get much better. And so it is here, in Origins, that we meet the same familiar characters, Tank Dempsey, Nikolai Belinsky, Takeo Masaki, and Edward Richtofen, who appears to be performing some sort of surgery on somebody. All of these characters are presumably sane and working for their respective countries, sent on some spy missions to ascertain and extract information from Group 935 and their experiments. They arrive at the wrong time though, what with the outbreak of zombies, the cause of which needs to be examined further. We're not just dealing with a simple time period switch, but rather entirely new concepts and story beats. On that note, we begin a new chapter. One thing to establish here is that the time period is referred to in-game as the Great War, as it once was in real life, and not World War I, obviously. And the only reason I bring that up is because, you know what, you'll get why later. And by later, I mean probably like 10 hours later. But yeah, in the Great War, it seems that the German Empire, with help from Group 935, has created entirely different wonder weapons than the ones we're used to. Giant robots powered by Element 115, parallel to something we're used to, but with Vril energy powering up automatons, giving them life in the original book. You can go inside the robots. Nah, that ain't right. You can utilize their feet. Nah, bro, the fuck? Listen, you go inside their heads. And inside each robot, you'll find not only audio logs pertaining to the lore, but also the name of each respective robot. The robots are all named after the powerful deities from Norse mythology: Freya, Odin, and Thor. There's interestingly a fourth robot in the map, though it's broken, having presumably suffered a fall. The community dubs this fallen robot Loki, maybe because of how similar Loki is to the Abrahamic Satan, who is known as the fallen angel. However, there's no name for this fourth robot found in game, and don't worry, I'm not about to drop a whole 30-minute Norse mythology crash course on your ass. I can actually control my urges. It all began around 5th century Scandinavia when these ancient Germanic tribes— in reality, the robots' names don't really pertain to any deep connection to Norse mythology. However, there is some simple relevance that I'll get to in a moment. Right now, there are a number of things to acknowledge in laying the groundwork for this new chapter. In the early rounds, the 3 characters, apart from Richtofen, directly acknowledge the missions they've been sent on, with each person intending to report intel about the German Empire's scientific research to some figure of authority, such as a Japanese emperor in Takio's case.
Our concerns over the German plans appear well-founded. Huge mechanized weapons stalk the battlefield. I must ensure the Emperor learns of these developments.
Richtofen, on the other hand, acknowledges a whole bunch of shit, from crafting a vessel for Max's fucking brain— yeah, the surgery was his cutting that motherfucker's brain out for some reason— to wanting to open some gateway. Like, I bumped into the local crackhead the other day, right, and he was telling me about the exact same shit. So, ladies, gentlemen, and those beyond the binary, right off the bat, we know that this Richtofen differs from the old Richtofen we once knew, and that this Richtofen is on that low-grade Zaza, that Reggie, feel me? Now, at this point, to help lay the groundwork further, we must ask ourselves one burning question: what exactly caused the zombie outbreak? Originally, it was the Nazi experiments that went awry, so what's the deal this time? Well, the answer to that lies in some audio logs, as is zombie tradition. Dr. Ludwig Maxis, along with Richtofen, were experimenting with Element 115, you see, but here, they actually got along. As they were messing with 115, they found out that they had to convert it into a usable form with the help of these makeshift conversion generators you yourself can utilize in the map. And in that conversion process, localized energy fields were created that teleported objects of indeterminate origins, leading Maxis to believe that the energy fields were causing objects to teleport across space and time. You can see an example of this phenomenon in the good old mystery box. As for who actually created it though, that remains a mystery. Get it? But given how Maxis had mentioned objects of indeterminate origins appearing through the localized energy fields, perhaps the box was simply teleported into the dig site somehow. But the question of who created it still remains, obviously. As they were mining for Element 115 though, they discovered these elaborate crypts with ancient texts and forms of cryptic and arcane knowledge. These crypts led to a hub of sorts with a blocked entrance, and all attempts to get through it yielded no resolution. Until it suddenly did.
It is by chance of fate alone that we unlocked the seal to the main chamber. Repeated efforts to use brute force proved ineffective and left the men exhausted and frustrated. In an effort to alleviate the tension, one of the soldiers brought a gramophone to the chamber, along with a recording by a group of performers known as La Source Noire. To our astonishment, as we listened to the first few bars of music, the seal itself began to open. I cannot help but wonder if other such recordings may similarly reveal other areas of the catacombs.
We can see a direct parallel to this phenomenon in utilizing said gramophone to access this area in the map underground, which is most likely the exact chamber Maxis was referring to in the radio. Placing the gramophone down and playing a specific record causes stairs to drop down, leading us to this area with 4 statues that, interestingly enough, resemble us, as Richtofen and the others. In front of the statues lie pedestals, presumably awaiting objects of some kind. The explanation for all of this lies in Maxis stumbling upon some form of ancient texts in the crypts that described a certain artifact called the Amplification Rod, which could be a powerful conduit for highly potent localized energy. Maxis could not find the original rod, so he drew up some schematics meant to eventually replicate the rod. Now, I honestly don't know where the elemental stones come into play. All I can tell you is that he figured out that the rods would house these elemental gems, and the resulting staff would function as a powerful elemental weapon, with the element depending on whichever gem you place in the rod. Now, where did the elemental gems come from? Who fucking knows? But my headcanon is that the stones were just part of the many discoveries they'd made in the crypts. It's worth noting how a couple rounds into the game, Samantha herself talks to you through the ether and pleads for you to build these replicas, as even though Maxis had drawn up all the schematics, he never finished the job, as he presumably fell to a zombie infection, whereupon Richtofen stepped in to cut his brain out. Look, I don't know, but with like the parts for each of the staffs have to be assembled in these very pedestals, solving that mystery. The resulting weapons bear a striking resemblance to the staffs mentioned in the coming race. In the book, the Vrilya utilize these extremely powerful weapons that can both wreak havoc and heal others of any ailment. Now in the map you can obviously see that it's literally the same thing, but coming back to the story, Maxis could easily build all sorts of powerful weapons to help the German Empire win the war after discovering and utilizing all the ancient knowledge in the crypts, especially with the help of 115. However, in the process of exploring the crypts, strange things began to happen across the dig site.
When I awoke this morning, I learned of mysterious events that took place during the night. Men working on the installation of the generators reported seeing ancient figures emerging from the mound. I would doubt their story, but for the fact that by morning, many of the men were either dead or missing.
It seems that by concentrating an immense amount of element 115 in the region, they exposed all the dead bodies of past humans and soldiers buried within the ground to the element's all too familiar reanimating capabilities, and thus they turned undead. In activating the element 115 conversion generators across the map, you can see its ability to teleport shit across space and time, and it just so happens that it also teleports ancient soldiers resembling Templars. The Templars presumably belonged to a time when the crypts were new, whenever that was, but if the Templars here are actually Templars and don't just coincidentally resemble them, then the crypts must have been built in some time between the 12th and 14th centuries. Progressing through the rounds, Samantha's voice can be heard growing more and more agitated and fearful. She begs for her help in releasing her from Agartha as she explains how she's trapped there. It kind of plays into the idea that Origins is not just a reboot of Zombies as we know it, but rather a direct continuation of it following Buried, with specifically Maxis winning control in the end. If you recall, the path of Maxis resulted in Samantha's soul forcefully brought back to Agartha at the hands of Maxis. It could be that after an unknown period of time, Samantha regained some of her sanity. After seeing her father become so corrupted due to both 115 and presumably the Vrilya, she might have used her powers in Agartha to reach across space and time to another timeline altogether, where she would then contact the 4 characters to help her escape. Though she wouldn't just contact the 4 characters in that timeline, she would also end up contacting her father there, much to his confusion.
The child's voice calls to me more frequently than ever. At first, she spoke only of her imprisonment in a mythical realm known as Agartha. Now she claims to be my daughter, even though I know no such child exists. I fear my sanity may be slipping away from me.
Building the 4 staffs for her, we hear her voice gain a sense of hope. Though the 4 staffs are not enough. Not in their current form anyway.
There's more to do. Father said the staffs weren't powerful enough. He said the clues were in the writings of the ancients. There were riddles hidden within the chambers. For so long he tried and tried to solve them, but he couldn't. He didn't know what to do. Every journey begins with a single step. This is step 1.
In a plot twist that comes completely out of left field, we learn that Samantha Maxis was actually Viktor Reznov all along, and so we must proceed on breaking out of Vorkuta by securing the keys. And so you do get and as you're climbing on the escape train expecting Reznov to follow you, he of course pulls the ultimate gamer move and just doesn't, in an effort to, wait, How the hell did I end up in this video? Must be the localized energy field space and time displacement Maxis was talking about. Now it seems Lil Miss Samantha here with her ethereal godlike powers wants us to upgrade the staffs for her? Like, bro, her ass reached across the fucking multiverse, but Lord forbid she help herself with basic ass shit like this.
Can you hear me? Please, you have to help me.
Can you hear me? Please, you have to help me. Bitch, help your own stupid ass. I've seen what ethereal power can do, bro. Imagine being so lazy you can't stick your staff up inside the... Oh. This is the part where Jason Hussein Blundell starts forcing us to stop playing zombies in favor of doing some random ass puzzles, huh? Now, I shit on this before by exaggerating and moaning about how you have to decode ancient Mesopotamian cuneiform writing, and while that isn't exactly incorrect, it's literally just base 3 and base 4 numbers that you gotta look at and convert to base 10 by doing a little bit of math, and you might think, oh, I can do that in my head, but as for me, I don't think. I am incapable of producing thoughts, so you know I gotta pull out an entire A4 paper for this shit. Now, what is the in-game explanation for who put this shit here? Girl, I got no fucking clue for real. Now, on that note, you might wonder why I'm in the Black Sun dimension from Wolfenstein all of a sudden, and you see, just as playing a record on the gramophone activated certain mechanisms in the main chamber, it can also open up portals to what is called the Crazy Place. Now, what does all of this shit mean? Guess if I have a clue. In reality, these portals must have been some of the many discoveries made in digging through the crypts, but the important part is that all of these portals are essential in building the staffs to begin with, and the Crazy Place is useful in some of the upgrade staffs as well. It is most likely a separate realm altogether, as it's quite visibly oozing with mystic elements. Playing into the realm idea, one can dub this Crazy Place as a part of Agartha itself, wherever the hell it is now. Like, that shit used to be inside the earth, but the earth got blown up like 500 times, dog. Like, I don't even know anymore. But coming back to the staffs, you do a bunch of math and some base conversion for one of the staffs before reading sheet music for another, right before you realize you have to do some base conversions yet again for another staff. Now, you can really tell how much effort they put in creating these 2 puzzles for them to use one of them for 3 of the staffs. You have base conversion and like sheet music. Like, first of all, who put this shit here? But you take note of the base you're dealing with and multiply the appropriate numbers together, while taking note of the columns, of course, before you add the resulting products up, and before you know it, you'll suddenly get hit by a zombie and remember, oh, that's right, I was playing zombies. I completely forgot. What was I doing? Samantha asked you to do a bunch more shit, and I swear, I was recently doing this Easter egg, right, and it really did feel like an acid trip at times, bro. Like,
I do not intend to follow my former friend into insanity. Besides, I know what you really are, Samantha.
oh hell nah, he about to open up YouTube shorts and unironically comment stupid ass shit like zesty and sus with 500 skull emojis all over the place in the year of our Lord 2024. Bro, like, he was literally gay himself in the other dimension. Bro switched teams for real. So yeah, he's a man who likes other men. Happy for him. It's at this point that there's plenty of heavy implications that the Crazy Place is the practical gateway to Agartha, where Samantha is trapped, but that there is a seal on the portal that we have to break, and I swear to you all of the steps literally don't mean anything, right? But there's this one step where you take note of the giant robots' names and their associated elements in Norse mythology so that you place the appropriate staff inside their heads. Like, for example, Thor is associated with lightning and thunder in Norse mythology, so that's the lightning staff right there. Odin is associated with air, so that's the wind staff. Freya is ice for some reason. Like, she's somewhat associated with the sea, but then you place the fire staff in the main chamber instead of anywhere with significant meaning, and it's like, okay, you know what, they were cooking for a bit, but then they just kind of forgot and left the stove on, and the food kind of burned the entire house down. But anyway, you do a whole bunch of arbitrary shit before you make a fully functioning drone powered by Maxis's brain to assist you in breaking through the seal in the Crazy Place. You might ask, hey, who put the seal on that bitch to begin with? And like, as with anything else in this map, just don't worry about it, bro. Like, zombies used to have either a scientific or mythological explanation for like everything, but not this time. You kill like 100 zombies, presumably harvesting their virile energy, and you overload the seal in doing so somehow before sending the Maxis drone up the gaping portal that's opened up. And
as the gates to Agartha opened, the 4 heroes were rewarded with riches beyond imagination. From that day forward, they knew that Samantha would keep them safe. Forever.
Getting everything wrong. I told you before their eyes should be blue.
it was all in Lee's head? No. By the way, don't you think this looks a lot like the beatific vision thing? Symbolism. Now, as for covering the all in Lee head ending, Pyro didn't want to do that shit for the 7th time in his buckshot roulette video, so I'll just do it here. The number one thing running through everyone's mind, including my own back when this shit dropped in 2013, was, wait, it's all a fucking game? I never would have guessed, bro, but in all honesty, it's pretty insane to take the entirety of the zombie storyline crafted up until this point just to basically say that it was all imagined up by some kids named Samantha and Eddie who sound like they're from suburban America for some reason. Like, didn't Samantha have a German accent? But you and I both know well enough that if they actually did give us an all in Lee head ending, I never would have made this video, let alone any zombies video to begin with. This cutscene is in my top 5 most shocking video game plot twists of all time skull emoji list for a reason, alright? Because get this, right before you think it was all a game, an air raid siren suddenly plays before Dr. Maxis calls them down to the basement, telling them to lock the windows before doing so. This is definitely not alluding to something that'll be revealed like 4 years later.
I didn't even get my turn.
Which the fuck was Black Ops 2 then? Now, if you're hoping for some cool, in-depth explanation for this cutscene, bro, listen. There are like 18 different things in this cutscene that each gave me whiplash when I first watched this shit back in 2013. Like, no one knew what it meant, bro. Like, this is you in 2013. It's like, oh my god, it was a dream?
Like, are you kidding me? This is just a game?
Press the eject button on your PS3. Oh my god, it's a game?
Is this playable?
The only explanation that makes sense is that they just did whatever and just like rolled with it for the next 2 games. Know what I mean? Like, it's like when rappers make noises that just sound like a hamster on lean on their freestyles before later insisting that they actually said some shit. Like, what did Cardi mean by this? And more importantly, what did Blundell mean by this? Was Blundell inspired by Cardi? Will Blundell end up going 133 and a 55? So many questions, and the best part is that you had to wait 3 years before you got any answers. Yeah, Exo Health was more important than this, bro, for sure. Just kidding, of course. I have nothing against non-Treyarch zombies, much to the dismay of like every classic zombies YouTuber. You see, there are 2 paths that you may take as a consumer of zombies content. One involves watching modern content creators who actually like the games, such as Rizzo or Nicole of Cringe, the latter of whom has an upload schedule whose consistency is only second to mine. She just like me though, for real. The other, God forbid, involves watching classic content creators who literally all hate the game, bro. Like, so those are content creators like me. Now, the map's main song, Archangel, gives us a very strong glimpse into Samantha's thought process following the events in Buried. In the song, Samantha talks about how when Richtofen and her father would kneel down to corruption and evil, they'll know where she stands. And you might be like, whoa, what's with the sudden shift? Like, wasn't she trying to kill everyone and everything for like 2 games? That is true, but as I said, she has had a change of heart upon seeing her father turn so evil, going as far as to imprison her in Agartha with himself. She talks about how she's lashed out and given in, referring to the events in World at War in the first Black Ops, before finally letting go of her hatred and malice to begin again. She's not perfectly sane all of a sudden though, as she mentions that her mind is corrupt and that her soul is corroded. Really, the song focuses on her newfound hatred for the wheel that keeps turning, the wheel of violence and hatred. It is a concept that was brought up in Ascension's song Abracadabra, what with her Sisyphean burden. The song showcases the anger she feels toward that wheel, with her vowing to break it before spitting the fire that is the line, "I am the end, a fucking archangel." I really like the whole Judas Priest painkiller arc she's going on right here, but like, it's hard to believe that this is the same Samantha that we see in the Origins cutscene. Like, this Samantha ain't ending shit, bro. Like, the only thing she needs to worry about ending is puberty, bro, for real. Now, the only other song in the map, Shepherd of Fire by Event Sevenfold, doesn't necessarily bring anything new to the table. It could just play further into the whole painkiller arc Samantha's going on to rid the world of all evil, among other things, but it's more likely that the Zombies team just licensed the song for the intro cutscene and figured to might as well just make use of the license by putting it into the map itself. Regardless, that's about all that Origins offers, and for a good 3 years, not much else would develop.